Something happened this morning that I never expected to happen. And if you're watching this right now, I need you to listen carefully because what I'm about to tell you is not just another story. In fact, I almost decided not to share it at all. For several days, I have been carrying a secret that has followed me from room to room, from breakfast tables to late-night phone calls, and every time I thought about speaking openly about it, a voice inside my head warned me to stay quiet. But silence has a way of becoming heavier than truth, and eventually you reach a point where keeping something hidden feels more dangerous than revealing it. A few nights ago, my son called me unexpectedly. That alone wasn't unusual. What was unusual was the tone in his voice. As a mother, there are certain things you learn to recognize without effort. You learn the difference between confidence and performance. You learn the difference between excitement and nervousness. And sometimes if you've spent enough years watching your children navigate impossible situations, you learn to hear fear hiding beneath determination. When he spoke, I heard all three at once. He sounded excited, cautious, and strangely protective. It was as though he was standing in front of a door that he wasn't sure he should open. The conversation began normally. We talked about work, schedules, responsibilities, and the endless list of things that seem to demand attention every single day. Then there was a pause, a long pause, the kind that makes you stop what you're doing because you know something important is coming. Finally, he said, "Mom, I need your opinion about something." The moment he said those words, I felt a knot form in my stomach. People often assume success removes uncertainty from life. It doesn't. Success simply changes the shape of uncertainty. The stakes become larger. The consequences become heavier. The decisions become more complicated. I asked him what was wrong, but he immediately replied that nothing was wrong. That answer didn't comfort me. In my experience, some of the most significant moments in life begin with someone insisting everything is fine. Then he told me he had been considering offering an opportunity to someone. A very unusual opportunity. A position that could completely change a person's future. A role that came with extraordinary responsibility, extraordinary trust, and yes, extraordinary compensation. The kind of opportunity people dream about but rarely encounter. At first, I assumed he was talking about a business associate or someone already working at a high level, but then he said something I didn't expect. He told me the person he had in mind wasn't someone famous. They weren't wealthy, they weren't connected, they weren't even looking for such an opportunity. According to him, that was exactly why they had caught his attention. He believed they possessed qualities that couldn't be measured on a resume. Patience, integrity, resilience, the ability to remain calm when pressure became unbearable. Characteristics that often go unnoticed because the world tends to reward noise instead of character. As he continued speaking, I found myself becoming increasingly curious. Who was this person? What had they done? Why was he being so secretive? Yet, every time I asked a direct question, he avoided giving a direct answer. Instead, he kept describing situations, small moments, tiny observations, decisions this person had made when nobody was watching, actions that revealed character. The more details he shared, the more fascinated I became. But something else was happening too. The mystery was growing larger. Then he said something that changed the entire conversation. He lowered his voice and told me that if this opportunity moved forward, almost nobody could know about it initially. Not friends, not distant relatives, not social media followers, not even certain professional contacts. The information would need to remain private until everything was confirmed. Hearing that made my heart beat a little faster. Secrecy has a strange effect on people. Sometimes it protects opportunities. Other times it hides risks. I asked him why such secrecy was necessary. Once again, there was a pause. Then he explained that attention can destroy something before it even begins. Expectations can create pressure. Rumors can create obstacles. Jealousy can attract problems that never existed in the first place. He wasn't worried about the opportunity itself. He was worried about what people might do when they learned about it. His explanation made sense, but I still couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to the story. Mothers develop instincts for these things. We notice when the words being spoken aren't the entire truth, not because someone is lying, but because they're still deciding how much they're willing to reveal. As our conversation continued, I realized he wasn't only protecting the opportunity, he was protecting the person. That realization stayed with me long after the call ended. I barely slept that night. Every possibility moved through my mind. Was this opportunity really as extraordinary as it sounded? Was there a hidden challenge attached to it? Was there a reason the chosen person had not yet been informed? The questions kept multiplying, and with every question came another uncomfortable thought. What if the opportunity wasn't the biggest secret at all? The following day brought another unexpected development. My son called again. This time his voice sounded different, more urgent, more serious. Whatever had seemed uncertain before now appeared to be moving quickly. He told me new information had come to light, and after hearing it, I felt a chill run through me. Suddenly, what had sounded like a simple opportunity began to resemble something much more complicated. Before I tell you what happened next, I want to ask you something. Have you ever felt that life was quietly preparing something for you while you were busy looking in the wrong direction? Have you ever wondered whether the opportunity you've been waiting for might already be closer than you think? And if you're watching from somewhere in the world right now, tell me where you're watching from. I'd genuinely love to know. If this story speaks to you, consider subscribing and leaving a like so we can continue these conversations together. What happened after that second phone call forced me to confront a possibility I never saw coming. Because the more I learned about the person he had chosen, the more I began to suspect that they weren't being selected for the reasons anyone would expect. And when I finally discovered what had been hidden from the beginning, I realized the job itself wasn't the secret. The secret was who had been watching them all along. The moment I ended that second phone call, I walked to the window and stood there longer than I realized. Outside, everything looked ordinary. Cars moved through the streets. People continued their routines. Somewhere, someone was laughing. Somewhere else, someone was rushing to a meeting. Life appeared exactly the same as it had the day before. Yet inside my mind, something had shifted. I could feel it. There are moments when information changes you before you even fully understand it. This was one of those moments. What troubled me wasn't simply the opportunity my son had described. It was the growing realization that the entire situation had been unfolding for much longer than anyone knew. What I had assumed was a recent decision was actually the final stage of something that had begun months earlier, maybe even longer. And the person at the center of it all had absolutely no idea. That thought stayed with me because I kept imagining their perspective. They were living their life normally, waking up every morning, handling responsibilities, dealing with disappointments, making choices they believed nobody noticed. They probably thought their struggles were invisible. Most people do. We assume the difficult moments happen in private. We assume our sacrifices disappear into silence. We assume nobody is paying attention when we choose integrity over convenience. But according to my son, someone had been paying attention. And not just occasionally, consistently, carefully, quietly. The more details he revealed, the more uncomfortable I became. Not because anything illegal or unethical was happening, quite the opposite. The discomfort came from realizing how much a person's future can depend on decisions they make when they believe nobody is watching. We spend so much time preparing for interviews, presentations, and important meetings, yet some of the most important evaluations happen without announcement. The next evening, my son visited me in person. The moment he entered the room, I knew the situation had become more serious. His posture was different. His expression was focused. He wasn't carrying the energy of someone discussing a possibility anymore. He was carrying the energy of someone approaching a decision. We sat together, and before I could ask a question, he looked directly at me and said something that immediately raised the tension. "Mom, there's a problem." I felt my stomach tighten. A problem. After everything he had already told me, that single word carried enormous weight. I asked him what happened. For several seconds, he remained silent. Then he explained that the person being considered for the position had become the subject of disagreement among several people involved in the process. Not everyone believed they were the right choice. At first, that sounded normal. Every important decision creates disagreement, but as he continued speaking, I realized this wasn't ordinary disagreement. It was becoming a battle. Some people believed the candidate represented exactly what the role required. Others believed selecting them would be a mistake that could create serious consequences later. The strange part was the reason behind the disagreement. Nobody questioned their intelligence. Nobody questioned their work ethic. Nobody questioned their honesty. The concern was something entirely different: their past. The room suddenly felt quieter. My son explained that several individuals involved had examined the person's history and found details that concerned them. Not crimes, not scandals, nothing dramatic enough for headlines, mistakes, failures, embarrassing setbacks, moments when things had gone wrong, moments when they had lost opportunities, moments when they had been rejected, moments when life had knocked them down, and some people believed those moments proved weakness. I listened carefully, and something inside me immediately resisted that conclusion because I have lived long enough to know something many people never learn. Success leaves clues, but so does suffering, and sometimes suffering reveals more about a person than success ever could. My son agreed that was the source of the conflict. Some evaluators saw failures, others saw resilience. Some saw risk, others saw strength. Some believed the person's difficult history disqualified them. Others believed it was precisely what qualified them. As the discussion continued, I found myself becoming emotionally invested in someone I had never even met. Who were they? What had they endured? Why did their story seem to divide people so dramatically? The answers came slowly, and each answer raised the stakes. Over the following days, new information emerged. The candidate had experienced financial hardship. They had faced periods of uncertainty. There were times when people close to them had doubted them. There were moments when opportunities disappeared without explanation. At one point, they had nearly given up pursuing an important goal entirely. When I heard that, my heart sank because every person reaches a moment when exhaustion becomes louder than hope. Some people never recover from that moment. Others do. The difference often determines the entire direction of a life. My son explained that what impressed him most wasn't the person's achievements. It was what happened after their failures. They kept going again and again and again, not because they were guaranteed success, not because anyone encouraged them, not because they knew a reward was coming. They continued because quitting would have violated something inside them. That detail stayed with me. The more I thought about it, the more I understood why this decision had become so complicated. Everyone claims they value resilience, until resilience arrives, wearing the appearance of failure. Then people become uncomfortable. They prefer polished success stories. They prefer certainty. They prefer predictable outcomes. Real resilience is messy. It carries scars. It carries disappointments. It carries evidence of previous defeats. Many people admire it from a distance, but reject it up close. Several days passed. The debate intensified. And then something happened that nobody expected. A discovery was made. A discovery so unexpected that it completely changed the conversation. Late one night, my son called again. His voice sounded different than ever before. Not nervous, not uncertain, shocked. I immediately knew something significant had happened. When he finally spoke, his words came slowly. "Mom, we found something." I sat down immediately. "What?" For several seconds, he didn't answer. Then he explained. During a review of records connected to the candidate, someone uncovered information that had never been discussed. Not because it was hidden intentionally, because nobody thought it mattered at first, but once they understood its significance, everything changed. Years earlier, during one of the most difficult periods of their life, the candidate had made a decision that affected another person's future in a profound way. The extraordinary part, they received absolutely nothing in return. No recognition, no reward, no publicity, nobody even knew it happened. The action had remained invisible for years until now. As my son described the situation, I felt tears forming in my eyes because what they discovered wasn't evidence of talent. It wasn't evidence of intelligence. It wasn't evidence of ambition. It was evidence of character, pure character, the kind that reveals itself only when there is no audience, the kind that cannot be performed, the kind that cannot be faked. Suddenly, the entire evaluation process shifted. People who had previously opposed the candidate began reconsidering their position. Questions changed, conversations changed, assumptions changed. For the first time, it appeared the opportunity might actually become reality. But that was when the real crisis began. Because while everyone focused on whether the candidate deserved the position, nobody was paying attention to another problem growing quietly in the background, a problem that threatened everything. Information was leaking. Tiny details, small clues, fragments of conversations, nothing enough to reveal the full truth, yet enough to create suspicion. Somebody had started asking questions, and those questions were spreading. At first, nobody took it seriously. Then more people became curious. Then more rumors appeared. The secrecy protecting the opportunity was beginning to crack. My son explained that if the wrong people learned about the process too early, everything could collapse. Not because the candidate had done anything wrong, because attention attracts interference. Interference attracts complications. Complications destroy opportunities. The pressure increased overnight. Decisions that once had weeks suddenly had days. Meetings multiplied. Conversations became urgent. Contingency plans appeared. For the first time, there was genuine fear that the entire opportunity could disappear before reaching the person it was intended for. I remember sitting alone after that conversation, feeling emotionally exhausted. The strange thing was that I still didn't know the candidates' identity. Yet, I couldn't stop thinking about them. Somewhere they were continuing their normal routine, completely unaware, completely unprepared, completely oblivious to the fact that a battle over their future was happening behind closed doors. And then came the moment that changed everything. A message arrived. A single message, unexpected, unplanned, impossible to ignore. The candidate had done something nobody instructed them to do, something nobody requested, something nobody would have blamed them for avoiding. And when news of that action reached the people making the final decision, the room reportedly fell silent because what they had just done revealed a truth nobody could argue against. The problem was that same action also placed them directly in danger of losing everything. and the moment my son explained why, I realized the opportunity itself was no longer the greatest concern. For the first time, there was a real possibility that the person chosen for the role might never receive it at all, and when I learned what happened during the following 48 hours, I genuinely feared we were about to lose them forever. When I tell you that I barely slept after that conversation, I am not exaggerating. There are moments in life when uncertainty becomes so heavy that it follows you everywhere. You carry it into the kitchen while making coffee. You carry it into meetings while pretending to concentrate. You carry it into bed at night while staring at the ceiling. That was exactly what happened to me. For days, I felt as though I was standing on the edge of an answer that refused to reveal itself. The last thing my son had told me was that the candidate had done something remarkable, something that confirmed every positive belief people held about them. Yet somehow that same decision had created a new crisis. The contradiction made no sense. How could an act of integrity place someone in danger of losing the very opportunity they deserved? The answer arrived sooner than I expected. Early the next morning, my phone rang. The moment I heard my son's voice, I knew something serious had happened. He wasn't speaking with the calm confidence I was accustomed to hearing. There was urgency in his tone, real urgency, the kind that cannot be manufactured. He explained that the candidate had unexpectedly chosen to help someone else during a critical moment, even though doing so created personal risk. A situation had emerged that offered them an easy path forward, a path that would have benefited them directly. Most people would have accepted it without hesitation. Instead, they stepped aside. They sacrificed an advantage. They protected someone else. And because of that decision, they unknowingly placed themselves in a vulnerable position. The room where the evaluation team had been meeting reportedly became divided once again. Some people saw the action as extraordinary proof of character. Others worried it demonstrated a tendency to prioritize emotions over strategy. The debate returned, the pressure returned, the uncertainty returned. For weeks, people had been trying to answer one question: was this individual truly the right person? Now a second question appeared: would they even accept the opportunity if it were offered? That possibility had never occurred to anyone. Yet the more information emerged, the more realistic it seemed. My son explained that the candidate was unlike most people he had encountered. They weren't chasing attention. They weren't obsessed with status. They weren't building their identity around titles or income. In today's world, that sounds unusual, perhaps even suspicious. We live in a culture that constantly encourages people to advertise themselves, to broadcast achievements, to seek validation, to measure worth through visibility. This person seemed different. The more people observed them, the clearer it became that recognition was not their primary motivation. Ironically, that made them even more valuable, and yet it also made them harder to predict. Several days later, a confidential meeting was held. This meeting would determine everything. Months of observation, months of discussion, months of disagreement, all leading to a single decision. As I waited for updates, I found myself thinking less about the opportunity and more about the person behind it. I kept imagining the invisible battles they had already survived, the disappointments nobody knew about, the lonely moments, the difficult choices, the sacrifices. I wondered how many times they had questioned themselves, how many times they had considered giving up, how many nights they had gone to sleep believing their efforts weren't being noticed. Because that is the hidden pain many people carry. Not failure, not struggle, the belief that their struggle means nothing, the belief that nobody sees, the belief that nobody cares, the belief that nothing will ever change. What happened next shattered that belief forever. Late that evening, my son called. This time there was silence on the line before he spoke. Not nervous silence, not uncertain silence, the kind of silence that appears when someone understands they are about to describe a life-changing moment. Then he finally said the words I had been waiting to hear. The decision has been made. I closed my eyes. Months of tension suddenly seemed to gather into a single heartbeat. What happened? I asked for a moment. He said nothing. Then he told me the candidate had been selected, not because they were perfect, not because they had never failed, not because they had the strongest resume, not because they impressed people with words. They were chosen because every piece of evidence pointed toward the same conclusion. When pressure increased, they became stronger. When circumstances became unfair, they remained honest. When opportunities disappeared, they kept moving. When nobody was watching, they still chose integrity. The final vote wasn't even close. People who once opposed them ultimately supported them. The reason was simple. Character had become impossible to ignore. For several seconds, I felt overwhelming relief. The story was finally reaching its conclusion. Or so I thought. I was wrong, because the greatest twist had not yet arrived. After the selection was finalized, there remained one final step. The candidate needed to be informed. Simple, direct, routine. At least that's what everyone expected. But when attempts were made to contact them, something unexpected happened. No response. Hours passed. Nothing. Messages were delivered. Nothing. Calls were placed. Nothing. A second day passed. Still nothing. At first, people assumed they were busy. Then concern began growing. Then concern became worry. Then worry became genuine fear. Suddenly, a frightening possibility emerged. What if something had happened? The person everyone had spent months evaluating had seemingly vanished. Communication stopped. No explanations, no updates, no answers. I remember hearing this and feeling my chest tighten. After everything that had happened, after all the obstacles overcome, after all the debates and sacrifices and uncertainty, could everything truly end this way? The atmosphere reportedly changed immediately. The opportunity no longer mattered. Finding the person mattered. People began searching through every available channel. Friends were contacted. Associates were contacted. Every reasonable effort was made. And still there was silence. One day became two. Two became three. The emotional weight became unbearable. Even my son, who rarely allowed emotions to influence his judgment, admitted he was worried, very worried, because the truth was something nobody wanted to say aloud. Life can change in an instant. Sometimes opportunities arrive unexpectedly. Sometimes loss does too. For 72 hours, nobody knew which possibility they were facing. I cannot adequately describe the emotional tension of that period. Every phone call felt important. Every notification caused anxiety. Every update created hope before replacing it with more uncertainty. Then finally, everything changed. A message arrived. Short, simple, unexpected. The candidate was safe. The relief that followed is difficult to describe. People who had spent months evaluating them suddenly realized how deeply invested they had become in their future. Yet the explanation they provided was even more surprising. During those missing days, they had been helping a family member navigate a serious personal crisis. They disconnected from nearly everything else because they believed someone they loved needed them more. No announcements, no public statements, no requests for sympathy. They simply showed up when someone needed them. When I heard that, tears filled my eyes because in a strange way, the final piece of the puzzle had appeared. The entire story suddenly made sense. Every observation, every evaluation, every debate, every hidden act of kindness, every sacrifice, every difficult decision, the opportunity had never truly been about qualifications. It had been about trust. Who do you trust when circumstances become difficult? Who do you trust when pressure increases? Who do you trust when nobody is watching? Who do you trust when doing the right thing costs something? The answer had been in front of everyone all along. A few days later, the official offer was presented. The compensation was extraordinary. The responsibility was enormous. The future attached to it was unlike anything the candidate expected. And for the first time, they finally learned the truth. They learned that people had been observing their choices for months. They learned that moments they considered insignificant had mattered. They learned that acts of integrity they believed were forgotten had been remembered. Most importantly, they learned something many people spend their entire lives discovering. You never know who is quietly watching the way you treat others. You never know which decision will define your future. You never know when an ordinary day is secretly becoming a turning point. When my son told me the story was finally complete, I sat quietly for a long time. Not because I was thinking about the salary, not because I was thinking about the position, not because I was thinking about success. I was thinking about hope, real hope, the kind that survives disappointment, the kind that survives rejection, the kind that survives uncertainty. Because somewhere out there, someone may be watching this right now feeling invisible, feeling overlooked, feeling forgotten, feeling convinced that their efforts don't matter. But what if they do? What if the choices you make when nobody is watching are shaping a future you cannot yet see? What if your greatest opportunity is moving toward you quietly while you are focused on surviving today? That is the lesson I carried away from this experience. Not every reward arrives immediately. Not every opportunity announces itself. Not every breakthrough comes with warning. Sometimes life is evaluating you long before life introduces itself. And sometimes the secret opportunity you've been waiting for is actually looking for